Hey guys, my name is Vladimir, you can call me Vlad, and you are with Code with Vlad. In this tutorial, we are going to see the fundamentals of the most famous Node.js framework called express.js. Express is a Node.js framework, a library. It is very minimalistic and inopinionated, giving you a lot of freedom to write your backend code. It supports pluggable functionalities called middleware, but it lets you basically do whatever you want. You can use Express to manage your whole application, front-end and backend, but the most common use case for it is to use it as an API, while something like React or Angular will act as the front-end. In this course, we'll build an API. It will be divided into two sections. The first one will cover the really basics of Express, the hello world, and the next section will cover a CRUD application. We're going to build a small API. If you like this course, please leave a like and a constructive comment to help YouTube algorithm to show this tutorial to more people. And without further ado, let's get started. Awesome, now that you have a basic idea of what Express is, let's go ahead and create a simple application. I'm going to use some basic command line tools here because this is what I use on a daily basis. Feel free to follow along. And if you have never seen them, it's also good for you to check it out. It's some very basic stuff. First, we're going to create the working folder. So we're going to call it Express Fundamentals. Then I'm going to go into that folder and initiate a new node project with npm init y-y. It will generate a package.json file where we can install our dependencies and our packages. So let's go ahead and install Express. Once Express is installed, we're going to drop into VS Code, my favorite code editor. I can just trigger it with code dot. This tutorial is compatible with Express 4, so if you have 4 here, everything should work. Now let's go ahead and create our main file where our Express application will live. We'll call it index.js. You can also call it app.js, but index.js is mainly the convention. Let's import Express with require and create the app from Express. The app is the main object that will point to our Express application, and then we just type app.listen at port 3333, and we'll provide a callback so we at least get something logging in our console saying that our server is running. And let's just write server is running at port 3333. The reason why I use this particular number is purely arbitrary. You can use any number, but usually I also work with React, and React uses 3000, so that's why I usually use 3333 for the API. The VS Code code editor here that I'm using also has an integrated terminal, but because our screen is very zoomed, so you guys can see even on mobile, I'm not going to use it. I'm going to use a dedicated window, a dedicated screen for the terminal here, and all our commands will be typed here. But feel free to use the integrated terminal on your computer if you want. So we're going to launch the server with node index.js, and we get a print from our callback saying that the server is running. So that's all very good, but now our application doesn't do anything. It just consumes some CPU and some memory. So let's make it do something useful, like returning a string. For that, we need to create an endpoint, a get endpoint on the root. And upon every request, Express will generate a request and response object. We're going to talk about that a bit further. But for now, to return something from the server, let's just do return.res send, and we can provide a hello from Express string. And we have made some changes to our server now, but those changes are not updated in the server. For that to happen, we need to stop the server and start it again with Ctrl+C and node index.js again. And this is not very handy because we want to see the updates that we do in real time. For that to happen, we are going to install a package called nodedaemon as a dev dependency, so hyphen capital letter D, And this package is going to reload automatically our server. So we run it with npx no-daemon index.js, and it's working. Now, every time we update our JS code, the server will automatically restart. So now let's go ahead and test our endpoint with Postman. It's a software to test API endpoints. And here we are going to send a request, simulate a request as if it was from the browser to our Express API, and we get the response. We get a string, hello from Express. Sending a string like that is not very useful. Express can do a lot of things than just sending strings. It can send a JSON object, for instance, which is very useful. It's the main usage in API. So we're going to create another endpoint, a get endpoint, to send a JSON object. And the way to send it is just simply to type res.json, and you provide your JSON here as a JavaScript object. So we're going to put status OK and data hello world, actually hello from Express. And let's go ahead and test that endpoint again. And we receive the JSON back. Express can also send files. Let's go ahead and create another endpoint, but first let's create a file. We're going to send back a HTML, so just create a simple HTML with a h1 heading. And we have our index.html file. Let's go ahead now and create the endpoint. And endpoint will be called file. And same logic, we are just going to return the res object with send file, and all we need to do is to provide a path to that file. The file is inside the current directory, so dir name plus /file. And we do the request and we get the answer. And this concludes the end of the first section. In this section we have seen how to use Express, how to start an Express project, how to make some requests. In the next section we're going to build a API, a small application, actually a programming courses application, a CRUD app. So we will be able to create courses, update them, get them and delete them. So take a small break, and we're going to continue on the next section in a very short amount of time. Welcome back. In this section, we are going to create a small web API, a courses API. In this API, we're going to create courses, update them, get them and delete them. It will be a nice application where we can use Express to its full potential. So without further ado, let's get started. So we will have kind of a courses database, but we're not going to use a real database because it will be a bit out of the scope of this video, of this tutorial. We're going to use a dummy file. It will just be a simple JSON file that will store our courses. So let's go ahead and create that file. Let's call it data.json. And in that file, it will be basically an array of objects of courses. And every course will have an ID, which will be an integer. It will have a title, which will be a string. It will also have a description, which will also be a string. And for some variety, let's add some arrays. So tags, which will be an array. And let's put JavaScript, Node, and Express. So that's our database. That's our dummy file. And we will write to it, we will read it directly from our JavaScript code. We can also go ahead and clean our old logic, so we don't need it. Let's clean this up. And we can also save the port in a variable and put it above, so we can just use one variable for port instead of having 2 times 3333, like that. Now let's go ahead and create our endpoints. So the first endpoint is get all courses. And for that, we need to load the database first. So we're going to load the file and then return the files in JSON format. We can use the require that comes along with Node.js that will load the JSON file and convert it automatically to the JavaScript object. And then we can just return it with return REST.json courses. And that will return us the JSON of our courses, and we can test it out in the Postman. So let's trigger that request, and we see that we have received an array of courses. Quite cool, huh? Now the next endpoint will be to get a course by its ID. So you remember that every course has an ID field here. We want to get a course by that field, so we need to create an endpoint for that. Let's go ahead and create app.get course ID. So the ID here is a special string. It's called a parameter. So we can get that back in our code. So if we hover on the request object, we see that the ID is here. So Express recognizes automatically that this ID parameter is inside the request. So now we can go ahead and, as always, load the database first, because we need to get the JSON of our courses. Then we need to get the course by its ID from the courses object that we got from the file. Then we need to return that course. So let's go ahead and implement it. So we load the courses like in the previous route, require data.json. Then we use find, which is a method on arrays, JavaScript arrays. And we find the element which ID is equal to the reg.param.id. But here's the problem. The ID is a number, but this ID that comes from the param is a string. So if we are comparing it, it will not really work. So we first need to convert the ID from the param into a number for the comparison to work, because it will compare two numbers in that case. Then we can just return that course. But what happened if we didn't find that course? If that course didn't exist in our database, we need to return an error. So if not course, if the course does not exist, then we can send an error, and we can provide a custom status, which will be 404. And then we just send a error JSON, status not found. And we also provide an error message that can be rendered in the frontend, for instance. Here we go. And if the course has been found, it will just return the course. And if we trigger that endpoint, we don't get anything for a very specific reason. It's because here we did a mistake. So here we return the course object instead of returning the response object. So res.json course instead of course. And that should work now. Let's also try to request a course that does not exist, for instance at ID2, and here we have a not found error. Amazing. Okay, and by the way, we also forgot one endpoint, and it's the endpoint to create a new course. So it will be a post request with endpoint/course. And here's the thing about post request. Usually post requests come with a body, but by default, Express doesn't parse the body. So we need to install a functionality of Express that will allow you to automatically parse the body. And for that, we are going to use middlewares. Middlewares are just functionality that you can inject into your app very easily. It's basically a function that will have access to the request and response object, and that can inject some logic to it basically before the routes have access to it. So Express has extensive documentations about middleware, you can check it out. But for now, we shall implement a very, very easy middleware and say Express .json middleware that will allow us to parse incoming body requests so we can use them in our code. So we are going to write a section about middlewares, and let's create a middleware with app.use and provide a middleware express.json, which comes shipped with Express by default. We will like always load the database of courses. Then we're going to build a course object, and then we're going to add the new course object to the database of courses object, and then we also need to save that database of courses object to the file. We haven't done that before, so that's something new. And let's proceed. So first we shall, as always, load the courses. So courses is equal require data.json. Then we will build a new course. So courses have IDs. IDs are auto-incremented. So the way to do it is that we're going to take the last element of the array, we're going to take its ID, and we're going to add +1. That's a very, very simplistic way of having a unique ID. Then we're going to provide a title that comes from the body. We're going to provide a description that also comes from the body, and the tags that comes from the body. The reason why we don't take the ID that comes from the body is that we don't want the ID to be tampered with. We want that to be unique and handled by our system. That's why the ID is defined by us. Then we are going to push the new course object to the array of objects that store the courses, and then we actually need to write that new updated array of objects to the file data.json. For that we need to have a specific package that comes with Node.js called file system, or FS. Let's load it up and use it in our application. So we're going to use fs.writeFileSync, and we're going to provide the directory where we want to write it, the file name where we want to write it. So that's pretty common. And then we need to provide what we're going to write it. We can't write courses because it's a JavaScript object, so we need to convert it first in a text in a way. So we're going, since we're writing a JSON, we are going to use JSON stringify function. We're going to say null for replacers and an indentation of 2. So let's save it up and let's test it up. And also, of course, we will want to return the new course that we're adding to the database. So we shall return a JSON with status created, and we'll have a status 201, which is quite common for a post request. When you create a resource, say it's 201, and we will provide the data, and the data will be the new course object. I think we got it all. Now we can test it out. Let's go ahead and create a new course, a course about Koa.js, for instance, with a description and some tags. Okay, that's done, and it works. You see that we have the status created and with the data, and if we get all the courses, we see that we have a new course about Koa.js. So our logic works. Let's go back and implement the next endpoint, which will be update course by ID. Very well. Now let's go to the next endpoint. The next endpoint will be a patch request. We shall update a course by its ID. So it's very similar to get course by ID. We can just copy paste the logic there. One important thing though is that we should not be able to modify the ID. So we want to inject the body. Like we can provide anything here in the body, and we should be able to inject it into the course. So we can update the description, the title, the tags, but we don't want to update the ID. We don't want to let the user to update the ID. So the way to do it simply is to detect if there's an ID field in the body, and a patch request also takes a body like a post request. And if it exists, we just delete it, so we just clean it out. It's some very, very basic validation. And then once we are sure that the body does not have an ID, you can just merge the body with the current course with the structuring. So that's a very quick and easy way to do it. And once we're happy with the updated value of the course, of course the course should be let and courses should be let, we shall replace courses object, the array of courses object, with the new course. And the quickest way to do it is to just map through all the courses that we have in the database and find the course which ID we want to update, and if we found that course, we can update it. So I have implemented a simple map function here. So every time that the ID of the course matches the ID in the param, which is a number, we return the updated course. Otherwise, we return the not updated course, just the course that was in the courses array. So maybe let's clean it up a bit and make it a bit more readable. So we shall call it updated course, and let's just modify it here as well. And basically, if we have found, if we map through the courses array, and if the ID is the one that we want to modify the course of, then we replace it by the updated course. And then let's save the file, the new courses array, as a file into the data.json and return the updated course. I'm just being a bit lazy here, and the status code should be 200 because we're not creating, and it should be okay, and updated course as a data. Let's try it out. So if we update the course 2 with the tag JavaScript, we have the right response. Status is okay, and the course has been updated, and the ID has not been modified. And we see in the courses that the new the object.id2 has tags of JavaScript. Good. Now we have a remaining endpoint. By the way, you know what? Pause the video and go to your code and try to make this route. Try to make app.delete and come back to see if you have a similar response. So let's go ahead and implement it now. We have courses, we load the courses, we need to get the ID. We first need to check if the course we want to delete is in the courses array. If that course does not delete, we return a none found for a 4 status. And then we just filter out the course that we want to delete. That's a practical way to get rid of something in an array. Just filter it out by ID. So if the ID of the course is equal to the one in the param, we don't include that in the new array filtered courses, then we just write filtered courses to the file and return the 204 no content status, which comes usually when you use the app.delete endpoint. Let's check it out here. Let's create a fake course. So fake course with some fake description. Okay, it is created, and we have the fake course at ID 3. So let's go ahead now and delete that course. And it works. We have a 204, no content. Our course is back, and you see that the course at ID 3 has disappeared. And here we go. This is the end of this section. We have learned how to create a basic CRUD application. It shows how to use express.js, like it really gives you the fundamentals. If you've enjoyed this tutorial, please leave a like and a comment in the description below. It will help me with the YouTube algorithm. And thank you again for watching this tutorial. See you in the next one.